Cowboy Country. A Fort Smith Tale. By Chris Lowry. Chapter 1. His face was a poet's, imagined by a sculptor who dealt in sharp lines and harsh planes. There was a beauty about him, like a coiled viper or a desert landscape. The lines around his eyes showed a propensity to laughter, and the wrinkles on his forehead were earned from a lifetime outdoors. He was long and lean, nudging up his 6'6" frame with another 2 inches on his worn boot heels that carried up higher still when he wore his battered hat. "You any good with that Colt?" the man next to him asked. Eldridge glanced over and studied the fellow a moment. He was a dandy, to be sure. His suit was pressed, and clean, pinstripes over gray that looked good on a big city street. It only pegged him as a greenhorn out here. He had a plain face, with plain eyes swimming behind round glances perched on beak-like nose. There were hints of a mustache under it, waxed up and colored to make it look larger than it actually was. Eldridge thought the man looked well put together, a concentrated effort at appearance. Better than some. He lifted up a shot glass full of whiskey and slipped it slow as he watched the man. "Would I have heard of you? Have I heard of you?" Eldridge tried to keep the menace from his voice. He almost succeeded. The man next to him shifted to a grayer shade of pale, like whatever he ate for lunch at the saloon was about to revisit. His swimming eyes grew a size larger, and his mouth opened and closed several times. Long enough for Eldridge to expect a croak or squeak or some other animal noise to come out. "I'm T. Thomas Fole," the man spit out. "Is that a stutter or an initial?" Eldridge turned back to his drink. His back was to the back wall, though there was a door behind him. He didn't like the door, but the hallway led to rooms occupied by the women of the avant-garde. The men who made their way back to them had minds focused on other things, and guns liberated by the giant mound of men standing next to the front door. He and Eldridge were the only two individuals armed in the establishment, by agreement with the owner. Part owner, he sniffed and tapped his now empty glass. He was the other part, and he damn sure agreed to be armed. Eldridge Sample, he introduced himself as Rose. The young bartender replaced his empty with a full one. "Initial," T. Thomas said and took a sip of his own whiskey. "The Marshal is Eldridge Sample. Are you he?" He nodded. He was indeed he. T. Thomas edged closer to the end of the bar and peered around to see who might be watching. No one was, not in particular. There were two cowpokes sitting on the divan by the front room near the door. It was called the parlor and it was where all visitors paid homage to the Madam, Kitty, before selecting their pleasure of choice. It was also where the other armed man in the building stood, just behind the door so that any unwanted interruption would receive the full force of the reinforced oak slamming back into them before the belch of a sawed-off cut short any more interrupting they might do. "Marshal," T. Thomas said in a low voice. It was just such a whisper and designed in a manner that left Eldridge with the impression that the man was used to a level of talk not to be overheard by others. A bagman then, someone who pulled the strings behind the scenes. "222, Thomas," Eldridge had a little fun at the man. No point in not keeping him on edge. "Just Thomas," the man stammered. "May I call you Eldridge? Are we friends?" "No, Eldridge, but I would like to consider you a friend. And I wish for you to consider me one of yours as well." Eldridge took a small sip of his whiskey and nodded. Thomas took it as an invitation to continue. "If we were friends," Thomas glanced around again. "The men I represent would like to hire you." "My pistol's not for sale," Eldridge said. "It's not your Colt we want, Eldridge." Thomas lowered his voice again. "You know the train was robbed between here and Springfield. The one you came to town in. The Springfield leg was recently complete and the railroad was making use of the new connection in Fort Smith to lay new lines west toward Salt Lake City. T. Thomas Falls was one of 100 new faces riding into town by rail and heading out on horseback or in a wagon to help put in the track. The men who robbed that train are going to be your quarry soon." Eldridge set his glass on the bar and stared at the man. The next words that came out of the dandy's mouth would determine how violent a response was due, he considered. Bagmen bought their way through the world, and the Marshal had little use for them. If he asked Eldridge to forego the hunt or throw off the trail so the bandits could escape, the man was as good as an outlaw himself. He had a certain way of dealing with outlaws that helped pacify the frontier town and bring in the railroad. "Those foul miscreants took something from me, and something from the man who employed me, and we would like to hire you to retrieve them both." Eldridge let go of a breath he didn't know he was holding. Thomas stared at his left hand which rested on the worn butt of the Colt Navy revolver he wore cross-strapped over his waist, the opposite of a twin tied to his leg on the other side. The wearing of it in such a manner was on purpose. A cross-draw was just simple when leaning against a bar and a number of men had made the mistake of trying their luck against him while he was enjoying a drink. Thomas didn't know that the long oversized hand caressed the butt out of habit, an absent-minded thing that Eldridge almost had no control over. His pistol was his instrument, and like a banjo player picking out single notes from boredom or thoughtlessness, so too did he touch his pistol. They also took a woman from the train. Eldridge tilted his head to one side like he was hearing the note of a new tune for the first time. A hostage? The rotund man nodded, his ponderous cheeks wiggled at the action. Eldridge took a slow sip of his smooth drink. "That changes things," he said. "A woman in distress could get the judge to intervene in a crime like this," Thomas said. "A crime like this," Eldridge returned to his whiskey, "falls under the sheriff's purview." He had done double duty as sheriff and marshal for a while when they first arrived in Fort Smith. The dirty dealing scoundrel bought by the railroad found himself 6 feet down after crossing the marshal's path. Eldridge's reward had been twice the work for half the pay. The new sheriff was an honest man, as far as those went in the frontier town, but he could manage a robbery and kidnapping. "I don't care who is purview," Full tapped his chubby fingers on the smooth polished pine bar top. "I want to hire you for the job. You don't know me." Full threw back his shot and grimaced it down with a gulp. "I have a confession, Marshal. I'm not a priest." The hand caressing the butt of the pistol froze over the grip, like a hawk hovering in anticipation of prey. "I knew you by reputation before seeking you out for this job." Eldridge relaxed. A lot of men knew him by reputation, and because of the unique nature of his appearance, he was easy to pick out. "The men I worked for authorized me to hire you," Full added. "I don't like railwaymen." "Good Lord, Eldridge." Kitty came up beside him and took his drink from his hands. "Don't you see you make the man nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs?" She tossed back the rest of his glass and motioned the brunette bartender for a refill. "I can't help if the man is scared of his own shadow, Kit." "He ain't scared of his shadow, you mean man. He's scared to jumping out of his skin of you." Eldridge shared a secret grin with her. "Now Kit, you know I'm not the type of fella anyone is supposed to be afraid of." His voice was low, and smooth, pitched only so she could hear. The problem was Full was close by and perked up to listen, so he could hear the giant man too. The city man shivered. Kitty snickered and put her hand under the marshal's coat. She ran her fingers over the knobs of his lower spine, tracing the bones that popped like walnuts through the fabric of his shirt. Her strong hands worked the muscles on either side of his spine, concentrating where they met just above his tailbone. He had shared with her once the secret that particular spot held. It was always sore. Whether it was from saddle or the particular circumstance that made him such a tall man, or from too many nights on hard ground, or getting tossed around in a couple of explosions in the war, he couldn't say. Just that the ache was there, a dull thing that reared its head like an injured animal every so often, unless he medicated with a particular strong mix of Kentucky whiskey. It was to this spot she always went, to soothe and pet, to knead and massage, and just the effort of it was enough to soothe him. "You ain't scary?" she asked in a joking voice. "Not to you. Not to me, not to any woman in here, am I right?" She winked at the girl behind the bar. "He don't scare me." Rose shared a grin with the marshal. "Nothing to be afraid of," Eldridge assured them. "Unless you're a man," Kitty said with the air of final authority. "Only the bad ones." She reached up and turned his lips so she could kiss him, and moved away with his drink to check on the rest of the room. Full watched her go, and turned back to find Eldridge glaring at him. "You," he squeaked. "You're the man for the job." He looked at the shot glass in front of him that Rose had refilled on her last drift, and slid it over in front of the marshal. "All right," said Eldridge. "All right, you'll do it?" The marshal lifted the shot glass and sipped the rot gut. He didn't spit it back in the cup, but the tight-lipped smirk seemed as if he wanted to. "All right, you're buying," he said as he motioned for Rose. "You buy and I'll at least do you the courtesy to hear you out." Eldridge pointed to a hidden spot under the bar. "Bring us the good stuff," he called to the brunette. Chapter 2. "I'm going with you." "Like hell you are," Eldridge snapped. The fog of last night's success was still upon him, its vice grip tighter than the coffee designed to burn it away. He tried to recall the details of the particular agreement he reached with the railwayman, but had trouble pulling them through the mire. He only knew that he agreed to the venture, agreed to a price that seemed generous, agreed to find the woman and save her from the clutches of the bad men who took her. T. Thomas Full stood on the boardwalk at the end of Alley's Cafe. Eldridge stretched his long legs across the weathered planks, a tin cup of the morning necessity gripped in one hand. The background noise of forks scraping on plates and murmured conversation as men ate crisp bacon and scrambled eggs didn't seem to bother him as much as the dandy man standing just out of reach. "Marshal," Full took a breath to protest. Eldridge held up his empty hand to forestall any complaint. "I agreed to do your job, Mr. Full." The job you hired me to do and the extra you are paying to do all on it. I do not need a nursemaid. Foale straightened his vest over his protruding stomach so that the pinstripes aligned with the matching ones on his pants. It did not seem to be on purpose, but rather a nervous habit. Eldridge recalled noting it from the previous night. I don't wish to be your nursemaid, Foale assured him. I wish to rescue my fiancée. For a man whose woman ran off with another man, you are rearing to go. She didn't run off with them, Foale said in a clipped voice. She was kidnapped. He took a polished watch from the vest pocket and checked the time. For a man about to collect a rather large bounty, you don't seem inclined to hurry. Eldridge sipped the last of the coffee and flicked the dregs past the wood of the boardwalk onto the hard-pressed dirt road. He stood and stretched, making an effort to ignore the creaks and pops his joints emitted. Reward, Mr. Railwayman, he corrected. I don't hunt for bounty. Foale glanced at him askew, and turned to start toward the corral at the far end of the street. Let's not get bogged down in semantics, Marshal. They have a day's head start. If we don't hurry, we'll lose them. Eldridge watched the self-assured man waddle toward the split rail fence that designated the corral attached to a large barn. He finished his stretch, set the empty tin cup on the cafe windowsill and followed after. Morning, Marshal, Ned called from the general store porch. The Marshal waved a finger in the proprietor's direction. Seen Will? Eldridge shook his head. He got worked up about the robbery yesterday, Ned told him as the man passed. He's been out chasing outlaws all morning. If you see him down there, send him back here to work his chores. Eldridge nodded. Ned's son was at that age where boys would start getting in trouble and up to mischief if they weren't saddled with discipline and responsibility. Even if he didn't see the lad, he'd tell Shifty to send the boy home as soon as he saw him. He figured with the lot of them looking out for the kid, he might stand half a chance turning out good in this mixed-up town. The bat-wing doors to the town saloon swung out as Shelley stepped onto the boardwalk with a tin cup of his own. He tilted it toward Eldridge. Marshal, he said. Joe just put on a fresh pot. Not today. Are you off on some task? Some adventure to apprehend the man who robbed the train yesterday and absconded with a damsel in distress? Eldridge slowed and snorted. Word in town moved fast, and he wondered which of the girls from the avant-garde let it spill. Probably Rose. The bartender could pour a good drink, but she had a special connection with Joe from her prior employ under Shelley. And she had not been instructed to silence, he reminded himself. Folks watched him ride out and bring back bad men 100 times or more. No reason this one should be so different. Except this time, he didn't have a flyer in his pocket that said the bad men were wanted. This time, he was a gun for hire. The thought gave him some pause, and Shelley had sharp eyes. He noted the Marshal's slight hesitation in step, and grinned that he had gotten under the tall man's skin, even if the bard was shallow. I have connections at the railroad, he called after the retreating back of the large man. Anytime you want to look for work in the future. Eldridge didn't realize his shoulders were so tensed up until his neck began to hurt. It was all made harder by the headache he hadn't been able to chase off with a second and third cup of coffee. We got a problem, Marshal, the short man who ran the corral craned up and shared a tobacco-stained grin. It's too early for problems. This dude can't sit a horse. Eldridge shot a look at Foale, his eyes squinting in the morning sun. I grew up in a city, the man shrugged. I take the train. He pointed toward the station at the far end of town, an attempt at humor to deflect the storm of tension he saw brewing on the Marshal's brow. It's a horse, he continued to explain. I just climb up there and sit. It's a little more to the damn thing than that, said Shifty. You get out there, wherever the hell it is you're going, and get thrown. I lose my horse. You just wait here at the hotel. Eldridge spied his chance to get loose from the city slicker. Foale pulled a pouch from his pocket and spread a spill of coins across his palm. It earned a wide yellow grin from the corral keeper and a sigh from the Marshal. Chapter 3. Do we have to stop for the night, Marshal? Foale queried as he reined up behind Eldridge. It seems like an unnecessary delay. Eldridge let his eyes drift over the clearing in the woods. Can't see the trail in the dark, he said as he threw his leg over the back of his saddle and settled on the ground to stretch. Don't want to lame the horses, he continued his survey. You do that and all that extra you promised Shifty won't save your life. The meadow was a narrow swath of rough ground where a storm-tossed tree fell against a shallow rise and rolled. He could see the lightning-charred culprit on the far side of the clear space. It snapped, ripped and churned the smaller saplings flat to create a break in the trees. This will do, Eldridge said. He wrapped the lead line around a branch and began to gather fallen wood for the fire. We're going to lose them, Foale tried not to whine. Eldridge scraped a quick circle in the grass and assembled a small blaze. They won't go far, he answered. He brushed off his long rough hands over the flickering flames. "Tie off," he told the dandy. "Might as well get some rest." Foal did not appear satisfied. He made a series of noises in his throat as he sat the saddle and spent a few moments of glaring at the narrow trail that led into the gloom. He made a final grunt and swung his leg over the saddle and planted both feet on the ground. He let out a high-pitched scream and fell over backward. Eldridge bounced up, a Colt appearing in each hand in an instant, as if he had held them all along and had been waiting for the warning. His head moved in a swivel, hunting for the thread. One Colt followed the direction of his chin, the second floated opposite. Foal shrieked again. "Stop that caterwauling," the Marshal ordered and sheathed his weapons. He stalked a few steps across the clearing and hauled the man up. "My legs," Foal stuttered. "My legs. If they didn't know we were after them, they do now." "I can't." Eldridge held the man steady as he let the feeling return to his tortured limbs. "Just climb up and sit," he snorted. "When does it stop hurting?" The Marshal helped him move across the clearing and ease the man down by the fire. "About a year. I'm not certain I can last that long. Keep hollering like that and you won't." He took another look around, hand near the butt of his pistol. Nothing set off his sense, though he remained wary as he tended the horses and retrieved their bedrolls. Foal tried not move after Eldridge propped him up against a saddle and mixed a quick jerky stew over the fire. "I feel like I'm dying," he winced. "Feels like it," Eldridge agreed. "I won't be much use when you catch up with them." The Marshal stirred some of the stew into a pan and passed it to Foal, then used a spoon to feed himself from the pot. "Did you think you would be grievously wounded from a saddle ride?" Foal slurped stew into his mouth like a starving man. "Much use when we catch up with them?" Foal stopped eating. "She is my fiancée," he stated. "I'm not arguing her provenance," said Eldridge. Foal snickered. "You find something funny?" "I do, Marshal," the man said. "I find you to be a contradiction." Eldridge nodded. "You're not the first man to say so. That reputation I mentioned earlier." Foal finished his pan of stew and stared at the pot as if hoping for a second helping. "It paints you as a certain type of man. A violent man. There is some truth to that. And yet, you come across as an educated man. An educated man can't be violent?" Eldridge scraped the last of the stew onto his spoon and ate it. He took the pan and pot and tossed sand into them, and wiped them down with a rag from his saddlebag. "Seems to me education doesn't have much to do with being violent." "I don't know," said Foal. "Most educated men grow above it. That what you learn in the big city." "Chicago," Foal nodded. The Marshal finished cleaning the utensils and packed them all back into his bag. "There's no violence in Chicago?" Foal shook his head. "That's not what I meant. Of course, there is violence in the city. Only it's perpetrated, for the most part, by the proletariat class. That a fact? Once a man reaches a certain level of education, he seeks to solve conflict with words and laws. That's what the railways bring here and all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Law and order? You can't have one without the other." "You may be right, railway man. I knew a lot of people in the war, educated and otherwise. Seems like they were all violent. That was war. It's the same out here," said Eldridge as he sat back against the saddle and stared up at the brilliant wash of stars that flickered in the night sky. "With the Indians? Seems like we're at war with ourselves. Like we're fighting for the kind of men we want to be. To bring civilization out to the savage lands. A lot of wars were fought by civilized men. A lot fought by savages too." He reached into the saddlebag and pulled out a bottle of whiskey to toast the stars. "The men who took my Claire are savages." Eldridge didn't answer, just took a drink instead. In his experience, a majority of outlaws were indeed savage. He didn't mind using violence to solve that problem. Foal muttered something, but he couldn't make it out. When he turned his head, he saw the man's eyes were closed, cheeks jiggling as he began to snore. The loud breathing cut across the peace of the clearing and echoed in the trees. Eldridge was sure he heard a wild pig complain about it, somewhere in the distance. He took another drink of whiskey, and another after that. If the man was going to disturb the rest of his night at such a high level of volume, he would need it. Otherwise, he might turn to violence just to get a good night's sleep. Chapter 4. Eldridge awoke with a start. His hand reached for his pistol before his eyes were halfway open. "Don't you draw on me," a voice called out. He sat up and stared into black eyes on the far side of the clearing. "Marshal?" Foal struggled to sit up. "Damn it, Rufus," Eldridge cussed. "That's a good way to get yourself shot." Rufus Base stepped out from behind a tree. "Indians." Foal spat and screamed as he tried to move his legs. Eldridge sat all the way up and motioned the other deputy to join them as he fed thin strips of kindling into the burned-down embers of the fire. What did you do to him?" Rufus strolled across the clearing without making a sound. He was dressed in deerskin breeches and a soft doeskin shirt, native garb to the untrained eye. He carried a rifle under one arm and a pistol opposite, a long knife on his belt. "This is T. Thomas Fowle." Eldridge nursed a small flamer higher and rooted around in his saddlebag for the makings of coffee and a tin pot. "I didn't ask his name." Rufus sat down across from the Marshal and took the pot from him. He poured water from a skin into the pot and set it on the edge of the fire, then produced his own tin cup from a pouch he wore on across his back. "I asked what you did to him. He's a dandy. Rode a horse for the first time yesterday. All the way out here?" The black face studied the contorted face of the man laying on the bedroll. "Did pretty good, didn't he? I think you like to kill him, bringing him this far. You find what you're looking for?" "Found you." Rufus' white grin split his black face. His eyes sparkled as he poured the coffee into his cup and into the one Eldridge held out for a fill. "You ain't never had a problem finding me," he said. "Seems like you make a habit out of it. As big of a trail as you leave, it ain't hard. I got to leave a big trail so you can follow it." Eldridge leaned toward Fowle. His eyes ain't as good as they once were. "He's getting old. If I was as old, I'd be home with my wife right now, instead of out here hunting outlaws." The two men shared an easy laugh and drank coffee together over a morning fire. "He's not an Indian?" Fowle repeated. "You know many black Indians?" Eldridge growled. "I don't know any Indians," said Fowle. "Just what I read in the papers." "In the papers," Rufus scoffed. "T. Thomas Fowle is a railway man," said Eldridge. Rufus raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You working for the railway now? Judge know about this?" "No, and no," Eldridge said. "And I ain't working for the damn railroad. Lord knows, I killed enough of their men they would never hire me for nothing." "They told me to hire you," Fowle gulped. "They didn't tell me you killed anyone." It was Eldridge's turn to raise an eyebrow in surprise. "Thought you said you knew me by reputation." "I mean, outlaws. They didn't tell me you killed men like me." "Men like him," Rufus agreed. "Eldridge, how many men like him have you killed?" Eldridge shrugged. "I don't know, Rufus, you know damn well I can't count that high with my boots on." The Marshal and the Deputy Marshal shared another laugh. "Sit up and stretch," Eldridge said off the panicked look on Fowle's face. "Drink some coffee and quit your worrying. I ain't killed anyone that didn't deserve killing." He refilled his cup and swirled it to mix the dregs, then passed it to Fowle. "You having any luck?" Rufus nodded. "I'm about 2 days behind him. He's headed toward the Colorado." "You ain't gonna catch him." "Damn you, I won't," Rufus said. "Judge said don't come back without him." "He always says that," Eldridge countered. "Not to you." "Yeah, well, he tells me to bring him back alive so they can stand trial. If he didn't, he would never have any work to do. Just issue warrants. It's easier if they're dead. Reward's the same, if they're alive." "You're just making my case for me," Eldridge said of the familiar argument between the two. "Pays the same if you bring back a body. And it's easier to get him back that way. A lot less arguing." "The good Lord knows you don't like to argue." "Just with myself," Eldridge said. "You lose that one too," Rufus answered. "I can't help it if I'm right, even then." "You just showing the railway man the way around?" Rufus pointed back over his shoulder. "'Cause the line is 20 miles that way, in case you're lost. A couple of banditos robbed the train." Eldridge ignored the jibe. "Absconded with gold and a woman. I should have known a damsel in distress would get you working for the railroad. It's not like that. You think you're one of them knights you was telling me about. Always shooting at windmills. I didn't tell you knights had guns, and I was telling Will, not you. I can't help it if I was listening. You want me to tell your daughter some stories?" Rufus shook his head. "I don't want you learning them nothing I have to dislearn them of," the deputy grinned. "There's 6, Fowle said." "6 what?" "Bandits." Eldridge nodded. "6, he confirmed to Rufus. "How much is the railroad paying you to find a couple of robbers and rescue the lady?" "Higher than you can count." "With my boots off?" "Higher than that." "Damn, Eldridge. You want me to break off and come with? And piss off the judge? We both don't need to be in trouble." "Yeah, he's probably gonna put you in the jail when you get back, working for the enemy like that." "Probably. You can come visit me. Bring your girls and I'll tell 'em a story." He held out a rag. Rufus took the rag from him and cleaned out his cup before he packed it away and passed the cloth back. "I came across a trail," he pointed. "Seemed like 6 riders with 1 horse riding heavy. That'd be them." The deputy stood up and scanned the clearing. "You're about half a day behind 'em," he said. "In case you can't read the sign." "I read sign just fine," Eldridge said as he stood next to Rufus. I said it was that way, Rufus clarified. I know which way you pointed, you old cuss. Careful who you're calling old, Rufus held out his hand. I can read a old man like I read the trail, Eldridge took his hand and shook it. Then I got nothing to worry about. They gripped for a moment, then let go. Eldridge watched him make the edge of the clearing. Rufus gave a small wave without turning and slipped into the trees. In a moment, he disappeared. Eldridge marveled at his silent movement, a gift from his Indian wife's tribe. Of course, he'd never tell the man he admired that about him. Or one of the things he admired. I can't get up, Full interrupted his musing. Eldridge reached down and lifted him to his feet. How fast can we catch up to a half-day head start? Asked the man as he tottered for balance, making small noises of complaint as he did so. Half a day, Eldridge answered as he broke camp and prepared the horses. It's taking too long. Full stared through the trees in the direction Rufus had pointed. Eldridge was pleased it was roughly in the same direction he had planned to go along the faint game trail. It takes as long as it takes, he stated as he helped the man mount his horse. It took a moment for the wail of pain to disappear. Longer if you spook him. Chapter 5. The moaning was beginning to grate on his nerves. They had ridden in relative silence most of the morning after Rufus left. T. Thomas Full only groaned as they shifted on the terrain, but when the trail was flat and straight, he rode in stiff-backed silence. Eldridge almost told the man to stand in his stirrups to give his bruised and battered backside some relief, but he had doubts that even this would assuage the assault on his derriere. Instead, he kept his lips compressed in a tight line as they navigated toward their quarry. They came across the trail of the 6 horses before noon, and from there, it was a simple matter to follow. He had to take the tracker's word that they were half a day behind. The weather had been good for the past 2 weeks, steady temperatures both day and night, with little wind and no rain, which meant any aspect of time worn across the churned earth would look the same to him. A day, half a day. Not that it mattered to him much. He was a patient man, and steady, which 99 out of 100 men he chased couldn't match. They would meander, or race hard for a particular destination. But horses, like any other creature, needed rest. No, he figured they rode hard away from the robbery, crossed the Arkansas and now were making their way to a series of caves hidden on the edge of the Indian Territory before it crossed over the Red River. The caverns were a good spot to hole up and wait. A good place to split the loot, and split up, and from there, it would be hard to chase them all. Not impossible, he reminded himself. Not if the judge issued warrant. That piece of paper gave him the right to hunt them from one ocean to the next, from the Canadian mountains all the way into the Yukon Territory right down to the border of Mexico, the whole of Cowboy Country. Once they crossed the Rio Grande, they weren't his problem. Not that they would make it that far, if it came to it. Those men would need to sleep, and Eldridge could ride them to exhaustion, would ride until the last one was in his sights. Marshal, Full moaned. Stand up, Eldridge said, giving into the kinder side of his nature. He glanced over his shoulder to where Full stared in horror. The Marshal followed his gaze toward a small dog-looking creature not far ahead in the underbrush. It's a coyote, he said. All of them? Eldridge stared from one and noticed 3 more flitting in and out of the shadows of the underbrush. His horse nickered under him, catching scent of the animals. He wasn't too worried. They were pack animals, but not prone to attack a man on a horse. His horse rounded a small bend in the trail and bounced up into a small rear. Eldridge fought for control as he yanked the rein to draw its nose down. Here, he ordered as his mount tried to spin away on the trail. The coyotes yipped and growled as 3 more scattered away from a dead man on the trail. Eldridge didn't have time to see what killed him. One of the coyotes growled and yipped between his horse and Full as it darted through the brush. Full's horse whinnied in terror and bolted. Eldridge watched the man bounce 3 times right off the back of his horse and plop into the middle of the trail. He let out a scream of pain and indignation. The yell scattered the pack away from the dead man, but Eldridge had to fight his horse harder to rein it in. The scent of blood and predators and the noise of the injured man made the beast half mad with terror. It wanted to run after the other horse, but Eldridge brought it under control. He turned it on the trail and clopped over toward where Full lay in the dirt, mouth open as he gaped in agony. Eldridge slipped off his horse and kneeled next to the man. "I'm dying," Full gasped. "The hell you are," Eldridge growled. "I'm not hauling your carcass back. Stand up." He grabbed him by the hand and struggled to lift him upright. Full teetered on one leg. "Can't put weight on it," he groaned. "Damn," Eldridge muttered. He steered the man toward a tree and rested his back against it, then handed him the reins. "Don't let this one go." He marched back up the trail to the body Rufus didn't mention. "Guess the old tracker didn't make it this far," Eldridge said as he studied the body. The coyotes had been at it for a while, So the man had been dead since dark at least. Most of his face was gone, but there was a pucker mark in his forehead. He had been shot. Close range from the look of the wound and black marks around it. Eldridge wondered if he was one of the train robbers. Full hadn't told him how much was taken, but they were ahead of the usual announcement that went out to lawmen. Was it enough to start killing each off for a bigger cut of the haul? Not that outlaws needed much reason to kill each other, he surmised as he turned back to the injured man standing next to a tree. Two men bracketed him, one holding a gun to his head. They stared at Eldridge with dead, dark eyes. One was shorter than the other, but both were whipcord thin. Skin burned by hours in the sun, creased lines around the eyes. Their clothes were dirty and dingy, well-worn and frayed from constant use. One had a wispy mustache that dropped over thin lips, the most stark difference between the two. Except for the other who held the gun. "You stand right there," the one with the mustache said. "We just want your horse." Eldridge let his eyes move over the landscape, searching for more. Were there just two of them? Were they part of the original gang? Were they just random outlaws? That was a problem in the Indian Territory and one of the reasons he had been sent west with Judge Isaac Parker to clean it up. "All the damn outlaws. All you boys have done so far is make a threat," Eldridge said. If there were just the two of them, he wasn't worried. He had met worse odds and come out ahead. "Don't you move, mister," the unarmed one said. He tried to yank the reins from Full's grip, but the man had locked down his hand in fear, his wide eyes so focused on the barrel pressed against his cheek he probably didn't see anything else. Eldridge shifted his weight to one side, so his coat would fall open. He didn't want to flip it to one side, not yet. For one thing, the movement might make the man pull the trigger and that would be the end of T. Thomas Full. Eldridge wouldn't leave him for the coyotes, but he didn't want to haul the dead man back to Fort Smith. Besides, he only had a little deposit on the reward money offered. The rest of it was to be released when they got back to town. If they shot the man, he wouldn't be there to get any more money. Eldridge didn't recognize the man from any flyers, but he wasn't in a particular mood to care at the moment. If he hauled them back dead, there was a 50-50 chance they were wanted for something. The man with the mustache caught sight of the flash of silver under his coat flap. Eldridge saw it happen. The man's pupils widened, he took a big breath through his nose, nostrils flaring as he prepared to warn his partner. He opened his mouth to shout. Eldridge shot him between the teeth. The second shot crashed into the wrist of the man holding the pistol, severing tendons so he couldn't clench his finger, and a third plowed into his forehead, much in the same way as the dead man on the trail behind him. He spun before both bodies hit the ground, his other Colt in hand as he checked his rear, and the woods around them. The echo of the shots faded away as smoke drifted away from them. Full collapsed down the tree, but didn't let go of the reins. His mouth opened and closed as he made a gagging noise that was part moan, part denial. Eldridge didn't see anyone else as he searched their surroundings. "You shot him," Full whimpered. It was an obvious statement, and Eldridge didn't feel it deserved a response. Full reached up and wiped specks of blood off his cheek. Eldridge lifted up his other hand and unwrapped the reins. "Good work, holding on to my horse." He led the nervous animal away from the dead bodies and tied it to a tree further up the trail. "You recognize them?" He rolled them over as he went back to Full. "Why would I know them?" he sputtered. "From the robbery?" Oh, realization dawned in his eyes and he looked at the two dead men again, studying their drawn thin features. "No," he said after a moment. "They weren't the robbers." "What about him?" Full craned his neck to peer up the trail. "He doesn't have a face." Eldridge nodded. "Fair point." He looked from the two dead men to the third. Rufus could probably look at the ground and tell if the three were together or if these two made an attempt to take a horse from the robbers as they passed. All he could make out were three dead bodies, and no way to take two of them back for a potential reward. Plus a man in shock that he was going to have to double up on his own horse, which would slow them down in the chase. He stood up fast and stalked to the dead man blocking the trail. "You remember what they were wearing?" he called over his shoulder. "On the train. The robbers? Well, I ain't talking about the clothes on your back, am I?" He grabbed the dead man by the legs and dragged him back toward Full. "You recognize these clothes?" "I don't know. You got to look to know." Full tried, and gagged. He leaned away from the tree and threw up. "I'm sorry," he wiped spittle from his chin. "I've never seen a dead body before. Not up close, not like this." Eldridge didn't quite feel sorry for the man, though he had a sympathetic look to his face. He'd seen a lot of dead men in his days, even before the war. Hell, he'd made a lot of dead men. But he didn't begrudge the man being sick. "If this is one of the men who robbed the train, that's one less we have to worry about when we find your woman," he said. Full nodded, took a deep breath and looked at the body. "Don't look at his face," Eldridge advised. "Look at his clothes." Full did as he was told. His eyes traveled the length of the man, and back again. He ignored the chewed face, chewed hands and focused on the plain brown cloth. "It could be," he said. "You don't remember how they were dressed?" "Like robbers." "I don't know how damn robbers dress." "Like you," said Full. Eldridge glanced down at his own attire. There were similarities between what he and the dead man wore. He flicked a glance at the two other dead men. The same could be said for them. The trail was hard on clothes. The fabric was under constant assault from weather and bugs, from tree branches and brambles. It was tortured by the sun and being worn day in, day out, serving as sleepwear and more for weeks on end. The fabric was thick, strong and plain by nature, easy to repair. The three men on the ground around them all had pants like his, shirts like his. "Well damn," Eldridge said. He hoisted Full up and led him to his horse. The marshal climbed up first, and held down a hand to help the man climb behind his saddle. "Slow going," he advised. "Do you think my horse is going back to the corral?" Full asked as they got back on the trail to find the bad men. Chapter 6. Eldridge had been trapped in a fusillade of cannon fire once. His position was protected, dug into the side of a hill under sufficient ground cover and hidden in a dense grove of trees and brush. The sight lines to the well-traveled road were clear, and though the shot itself was at the limit of his range, he knew how to read the wind and calculate for drop. He took out an officer first, and used a second rifle to remove another when the men on the road spun the wheeled cannons around and peppered him with 8-pound shot. The iron balls plowed into the dirt around him, and the infantry lined up and began firing into the grove. Musket balls tore through the leaves and showered him with debris, pieces of bark ripped off and he could feel the pepper sting of them against his cheeks. The enemy fired and fired again. When one line reloaded, the other shot. The cannons seemed endless, until suddenly they were silent and he could hear the sound of 100 feet rushing to where he was hidden to finish the job. He longed for the peace of that attack after half an hour with Full on the back of his saddle. The man would not shut up. How much further? The man interjected into his steady, windy monologue. Eldridge shrugged. He was past talking to answer questions and only gave the most vague response to yes or no queries in the form of grunts and shrugs. He toyed with the idea of shoving the man over backwards and leaving him, but too many people had seen them ride out together. The marshal didn't want to have to hunt himself to bring back to justice. Besides, if something untoward did come to Mr. T. Thomas Full, then Eldridge would not get paid, and he didn't plan to suffer this fool yapping for naught. They rode across a small stream that trickled south, in the direction of the river, and he knew they would be at the cave soon. He pulled up the reins and waited for Full to slide down. "Off," Eldridge said when the man didn't. "Are we here?" "Almost." Full lowered himself from the back of the horse and hobbled toward a tree. "How will the three of us get back?" he asked as he stared up the trail where it disappeared around a bend. Eldridge liked his confidence in their chances. "We'll sort it out," he assured the railway man. He threw his leg off the side of his saddle and dropped to the ground. "Stay here," he said, and began a slow walk up the trail. "What are you doing?" Full called after him. Eldridge made a hushing motion with his hand. The damn fool was too damn noisy for quiet work. He planned to go around the bend and sneak as close to the caves as he could get and see the lay of the land. He knew it in his mind, but it had been some time since he was last here, and then there had not been a half-dozen bad men who robbed a train. Eldridge held up a finger to Full, and damn near lost it when a bullet whizzed past like a fat angry bee. The sound of the shot followed, rushing to keep up. The marshal dropped to a squat and scurried for the cover of the trees as he tried to pinpoint where the shot came from. He had a good idea who was doing the shooting. "Marshal!" T. Thomas Full screamed after him. Eldridge motioned the man down, and hoped he followed instructions. The dumb son of a bitch just told the bad men who they were up against, and he didn't want to give him a chance to point out where he was in the trees. He slid a pistol in one hand and slipped into the trees. There wasn't much cover. The stream overflowed its banks enough to turn the area into bottomlands, which meant there were few bushes or brambles to hinder his progress. It also meant he had little to hide behind. He flitted from tree to tree, waiting for the next shot to follow, or for the bandits to shoot Full. They didn't. Eldridge made his way through the forest and circled back further up the trail toward the caves. He saw a small figure scramble back toward an opening in the wall of a bluff just back from the river. He didn't like what else he saw. Too much open space leading up to the cave openings. The small spaces were carved from the rock when the river flooded, which left shallow small holes in the face of the bluff above the water. The river took a lazy slow turn in front of it due to a gravel sandbar. It made for a good place to cross the water and a great place to hide. It was also a good place to hole up and defend, Eldridge thought. He could see a trickle of smoke from two caves, spread apart by a dozen yards or so, which meant the outlaws had split up. If he was advising an army, he would suggest a tactical retreat. Two well-defended positions on high ground over open field was an invitation for disaster. Any advance could be cut in half with a quick volley, and the survivors picked off as they turned tail and ran. "Damn," he breathed as he peeked from behind a tree. He watched a figure dart from one cave to the next, making excited motions as it pointed toward the trail. The rest of the outlaws spilled out to take a look, but all they could see were trees on the far side of the open space and the break where the trail ran. Eldridge cursed under his breath again. If he brought his Henry, he might have gotten 2 or 3 from this range. There were still 6 of them. He did a quick count. It left him wondering who the poor coyote dinner was, but that was a mystery best left for later. Right now, he had a rescue to effect. He snuck back through the bottomlands and came out on the trail further back from where Foal cowered next to the tree, peering in the direction of the caves. He let out a piercing shriek when Eldridge kicked his boot. "Damn it," Eldridge cursed him. "Can't you keep quiet for a minute? I'm not used to this. You're the one who wanted to be in on it. Did you see them? Are they there?" Eldridge nodded. "Did you see her? Have they hurt her?" "I didn't see a woman," he said. "They're in a couple of caves up on top of a bluff. I counted 6. Who was that back there?" Eldridge shrugged. "I was wondering that myself. How are you going to save her?" "I'm not," said Eldridge. "But Marshal, I'm paying you good money." "We are?" Foal gulped. "Me? I'm not skilled at." "Relax, railwayman. You're just going to do a little more of what you've been doing." He pulled his second pistol and flipped it around to pass the grip to Foal. "I don't know how to shoot." Foal hesitated to take it. Eldridge pressed it toward his hand. "Point it at the caves, pull the trigger. What if I hit someone?" "Then you will be damn lucky," the Marshal said. "I just need you to make some noise." "Noise? You've been screaming your damn head off this whole trip," he said. "Now you can put it to good use." "I won't do you much good in a fight," Foal objected again. "You ain't fighting," Eldridge told him. "You're going to stay in the trees and start shooting at them." Pow! 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 Eldridge made a finger gun and demonstrated by a 3 count between each shot. "They're gonna start shooting back, so you keep behind the trees." "What if they shoot me?" "Then you'll be damn unlucky. I didn't come all this way to die." "Then stay behind a tree and keep them looking where you are." "Where are you going to be?" "Where they ain't looking." Chapter 7. This time he went in the opposite direction, just in case they had seen him moving in the trees before. He crept and crawled and scurried through the bottomlands, moving as silent as a panther stalking a deer. Part of it was on purpose, but it was second nature from the war. Then, he had to stay quiet or he would get dead. He supposed the same held true now. But he wanted to stay silent because Foal was making enough noise for the 2 of them. Eldridge could hear the man moan and groan as he shuffled and hobbled up the trail in the direction of the outlaw hideout. He was using the trees to stay upright, scraping and snapping as he made his way to confront the men who kidnapped his fiancée. The Marshal continued through the bottomland next to the tributary until the ground started to rise. Here, he was going to have to be careful. Because if the outlaws were smart, they would have a lookout posted where he was planning to go. He crawled the last 10 feet and paused on the edge of the trees. They weren't smart, least not as he could see. Still, he kept crawling lest there was a pair of eyes hiding up here. He reached the top of the bluff and peered down. The holes in the dirt were 15 feet from him, on a flat path carved by foot in the side of the bank. He watched as 2 men darted out of the cave further away, glare at the trail and move back in, like caged animals pacing. He could almost smell their fear from here. Dirt erupted in a geyser next to his face and he flinched away, rolling back from the edge as the shot rang out. 3 seconds later, a second shot pinged into the face of the bluff. It was Foal. Damn fool almost got him with a wild shot. He counted 3 again and the next shot plowed into the bank below. Then the outlaws opened up. There was no way they could see what they were shooting at, just shooting back into the trees where Foal was hidden. Where he hoped Foal was hidden. Eldridge wiped away a trickle of blood and dirt from his temple and crawled closer to the edge. He saw 3 men kneeling on the narrow path, pistols aimed at the woods, firing, and he almost didn't kill them. It was too easy, too one-sided. He was at their back, they were focused on the trail, and it just didn't seem fair not to give them a fighting chance. Of course, he thought, if they wanted a fighting chance they wouldn't have gone outlaw to rob trains and kidnap women. She was down there, in one of the caves if she was still alive. Maybe hurt. That decided it for him. Eldridge lined up and sent 3 quick shots over the edge of the bluff. The three guns went silent as the bodies flopped over. One kept going and slid down the incline of the bank. The marshal rolled back from the edge, because Foal still might catch him with an accidental wild one. He heard voices and shouts of confusion coming from below as the other outlaws tried to decide where the danger was coming from. Footsteps pounded on the narrow trail and he risked a peek. Two men and a woman scrambled down the path toward where horses were tethered in a sheltered grove. Foal sent a shot into the dirt and the woman screamed. The three kept running. Eldridge slipped over the edge of the bluff and dropped the 6 feet to the path. He couldn't run after them, couldn't give chase. There were only 2 men with the woman, which meant there was one more in the caves. Maybe injured, maybe laying in wait. He searched for something to throw in, a rock or branch to act as a distraction. A bullet slammed into the dirt next to his head and he fell to the ground. Damn Foal. There was no way to communicate to the man to stop shooting and he had 2 bullets left in the Colt. 2 more chances to hit the marshal. Eldridge scooped up a handful of dirt, tossed it into the cave closest to him and crawled in on his elbows and knees, gun leading the way. It was empty. He could see embers glowing in a shallow fire pit, and a couple of bedrolls around the ashes. He backed out, hoping like hell Foal didn't shoot him in the ass, and crawled to the next hole in the wall. He did the same trick again, throwing a handful of dirt that skittered across the rock floor smoothed by years of flooding. There was a second fire pit with 2 more bedrolls around it, small flames still sparking under a rabbit on a spit. No outlaw though. He backed out again and rocked to his feet. Foal! He screamed. Don't shoot. He watched 3 horses tear across the bottom of the bluff and head for the trail where Foal was hidden. Eldridge ran to the 3 horses still tethered, his mind whirling, as he hopped on the back of one and yanked it to race after the criminals. He caught them on the trail. Foal stood in the middle of the path, Colt held in both outstretched hands, holding the trio at bay. Chapter 8. You left me, a tear streaked from the corner of the railway man's eye. The dusky-skinned man next to the woman tried to move his horse between her and the man in the trail, but the Colt wavered in his direction and he froze. Hold on, Eldridge called as he rode up. They robbed the train, Marshal. Foal called. He squeezed the trigger and the second man, the one closest to Eldridge, went rigid and pitched over the back of his horse. The woman squeaked in terror and tried to keep her mount from bolting. I said hold on, damn it. The marshal shouted. None of it made sense. The man on the ground was a light-skinned black man, the woman another outlaw the same. Eldridge couldn't see a bulging saddlebag, or payroll chest or anything that indicated robber. They looked more like runaway slaves he had seen before the war than anything. Hold on, he growled again, gun gripped tight in his hand. I didn't leave you, the woman sobbed. He's my husband. She pointed at the other man, who kept trying to ease in front of her. I paid your way to come here, I gave you everything you wanted and this is how you repay my affection? Drop that pistol, Eldridge commanded. Foal ignored him. You run off with the first buck that shows you the slightest interest? We were married before you, the woman answered. I told you I was coming out here to be with Thomas. I said hold on, damn it. Eldridge lifted his pistol and fired a shot into the air. Where's the money from the train? Train? Thomas asked from the horse. We didn't take no money from the train, just Ruth. You don't get to use her name, Foal shouted. He pointed the pistol at Thomas and pulled the trigger. The shot knocked him off his horse. Ruth reached out to grab him, and fell over with him. Foal pointed the pistol at her and clicked on an empty chamber. Foal. Eldridge aimed, but a horse shied in his way. The man hobbled toward Ruth as she sobbed over Thomas. He grabbed her by the throat. I would have given you everything, he shrieked and slammed the Colt into her head. Eldridge kicked the horse he was on to the side to a clear shot. He took it. Thomas Foal fell across the woman and pinned her down. Eldridge scrambled off the back of the horse and hauled the dead weight off her. She gave a big breath, shivered and stopped breathing. He could see white bone under her split scalp. He took a step back and stared at the carnage. Son of a bitch, he muttered as he glared at Foal. Chapter 9. Eldridge gathered all the horses, including his own, further up the trail where it grazed. He strapped a body to each, tying hand to foot under the belly so they wouldn't slip off. He picketed the string of ponies and went back to explore the caves, and only found bedrolls, and the crispy charred rabbit. He tore off bits of meat as he sat on the path in front of the bluffs and considered what happened. Foal killed a woman out of jealousy. A woman who wasn't his wife, nor his fiancée. A woman married to another man, both ex-slaves or close enough to it. Not an outlaw gang, but a group of survivors running west to make a new life. No railroad money. And with Thomas Foal dead, no promised reward money either, if there had ever been any. Bastard, he tossed the small bones off the riverbank and hopped into his saddle. He led the string of horses back up the trail until he came to the 3 dead men. It took a few moments to tie them across the horses, 3 of them riding heavy, which meant slow going. It would take some extra time to get back to Fort Smith, adding a half day to his trip. But he could sell the extra mounts to Shifty, and there might be wanted posters for the 2 dead robbers. Enough to pay the gravedigger, he hoped. And maybe the judge would have warrants for the real train robbers, if they left a trail. He might just let them get away with it. Eldridge had just about had his fill of railwaymen. The end.